The twin suns burned high over the wide desert, turning the sand into a sheet of gold. Wind moved in long waves across the land, carrying heat and dust. There were no birds, no plants, no shade, only the silence of a place that seemed forgotten by time. At the center of this emptiness, a single figure struggled. Mara's head was the only thing visible above the sand. Her dark hair clung to her face, tangled with dust. Her lips were cracked, and her throat felt raw, but she kept breathing. She had been there since morning, buried to her neck, unable to move. The sand pressed against her chest and legs, holding her like stone. The people of her village had brought her here at sunrise. There had been no trial, no chance to speak. To them, her fate was simple: she could not give life, so she was not worth life. In their society, every woman was expected to carry children and continue the bloodline. Those who could not were seen as broken. And the broken were left for the desert. Mara had begged when they tied her arms. She had cried out when they covered her in sand. Not because she feared pain, but because she could not understand why kindness did not matter. She had been a healer in the village, she had saved lives, treated wounds, and comforted children. Yet none of that mattered when they learned she could not have children of her own. Now, with the weight of the sand pressing her down, she stared at the horizon. The suns shimmered above the dunes. Her lips whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for strength. The desert was silent, and no answer came. Hours passed. The heat grew sharper, cutting through her skin. Her eyes closed and opened again, heavy with exhaustion. She could hear the faint sound of her own breath. Every so often, she thought she heard footsteps, but it was only the wind moving the sand. Then, late in the afternoon, something new appeared. A low hum came from far away, faint at first, but growing stronger. Mara tried to lift her head. The sound was strange, not the voice of wind, not the step of an animal. It was steady, mechanical. On the far edge of the dunes, a shape broke the horizon. It was a vehicle unlike anything she had seen in her village. Metal and wheels glinted under the suns. It moved smoothly across the sand, not sinking, its engines purring like a quiet beast. Inside the rover sat a man and a boy. The man's hands were firm on the controls, his face calm but watchful. His clothes were light and practical, with dust on his boots and gloves. He was a traveler, maybe a worker or a settler. The boy beside him leaned forward, curious, his small face pressed close to the glass. The man's name was Thomas. He had lived on this world for 3 years, far from the large colonies. He was not a soldier or a miner but an engineer who worked with machines and repairs. He liked the quiet, the open lands, and the simple life he could give his son, Finn. Since the loss of his wife, Thomas had chosen distance from cities and crowds. Out here, it was just father and son, a small family moving through a large and silent world. Finn pointed suddenly, his voice high with surprise. "Father, look there. Ahead." Thomas narrowed his eyes. At first, he thought it was a trick of the dunes. Then the shape became clear. A face, half hidden in sand, still and pale. He slowed the rover. The hum of the engine dropped. The man's instincts warned him to be careful. Sometimes the desert held traps, or scavengers used bait to draw the unwary. But something about this head was different. It was not the calm stillness of stone. The eyes moved. Thomas brought the vehicle closer, stopping a short distance away. He stepped out, the heat striking his face. Finn stayed inside, wide-eyed, as his father walked across the sand. Each step sank slightly, but his boots kept firm. Mara's heart raced as she saw the figure come closer. His clothes were strange. His skin was lighter than hers, his features sharp but not unkind. He carried no weapon, only a small pack at his side. When he stopped in front of her, she could see his eyes clearly, steady, questioning, not cruel. Can you speak? He asked, his voice calm but direct. Her lips moved, dry and slow. Please, help. Thomas crouched, his shadow falling over her face. The sand around her was packed tight, hardened by hours of heat. It would take time to dig her free. Who did this to you? My people, she said weakly. I cannot give children. They said I have no worth. Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked around, scanning the horizon. The area seemed empty, but he knew enough about local cultures to understand danger. To them, interference could be seen as crime. Still, the idea of leaving someone to die in the sand sat wrong with him. Hold on, he said, standing. You are not staying here. He returned to the rover. Finn looked up at him with wide eyes. Are we helping her? Yes, Thomas said simply. He took out a small spade and a portable digger. The machine was small but powerful, made for clearing sand around machinery or pipelines. He strapped it to his belt and walked back. Mara watched every movement, her breath uneven. The first scoop of sand felt like hope. The ground loosened, a small section giving way around her shoulders. Thomas worked carefully, layer by layer, making sure not to hurt her. He spoke little, his focus steady. Stay calm, he said once. We will get you out. The sun dipped lower as he worked. Sweat ran down his back. Finn brought water from the rover, holding the bottle for Mara so she could sip. The cool liquid touched her tongue like a gift from another world. For the first time that day, Mara believed she might survive. The sun had begun to drop, but the heat still clung to the desert. The sand glittered like tiny pieces of glass as Thomas kept digging. The wind shifted, carrying a low hiss over the dunes. Every movement of his spade cut through the hard-packed sand around Mara's shoulders. Each scoop made the pressure on her chest lighter. Mara tried to stay calm. She could feel the coolness creeping back into her arms and legs as the layers of sand were removed. Still, fear sat heavy in her mind. She kept glancing at the horizon, half expecting to see shapes rising from the distance. Her people did not forgive easily. Inside the rover, Finn's small face pressed against the window. His eyes were wide with curiosity, but there was no fear. The boy trusted his father completely. He had seen Thomas fix broken machines, treat injuries, and guide them through storms. To him, this was just another problem his father was solving. Thomas worked with a quiet strength. His gloves were covered with dust, and sweat ran down his neck, but his movements were steady and careful. He kept his focus on the task, speaking only when needed. You will be free soon, he said once, his voice calm but firm. Do not move too much. The sand can shift fast. Mara swallowed and gave a weak nod. She wanted to thank him, but her throat felt dry. The small sips of water Finn had given her earlier helped, but every word felt like it scraped her throat. Finally, after long minutes of digging, Thomas pulled away a heavy layer of sand and saw her arms. They were thin but strong, the skin marked with the pressure of being trapped. He cleared more space and then reached down to take her wrist. Can you move your fingers? He asked. Mara moved them slowly. Pain shot through her arms, but she could move. It was enough. Good, Thomas said. We will keep going. He worked faster now, using both the spade and the small digging tool. The machine hummed, loosening the packed layers quickly. With each bit of progress, Mara's breathing grew easier. At last, the final layer gave way, and Thomas stepped back. You are ready. Lean forward if you can. Mara tried. Her body felt stiff and numb, but she pushed with what strength she had left. The sand shifted under her, and for a moment, she thought she would sink again. Then Thomas stepped forward and slipped an arm under hers, pulling gently. The movement was slow but sure. Inch by inch, she came free. Her legs dragged through the sand, weak from hours of pressure, but finally, she was out. Thomas lowered her to the ground, sitting her upright. She gasped for air, the feeling of open space a shock to her lungs. Finn came running from the rover, carrying another bottle of water. "Here," Finn said softly, his small hand steady as he held it for her. Mara drank carefully, letting the cool water ease her throat. She looked at the boy and then at his father. Two strangers, and yet they treated her as if she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas shook his head. "No need for thanks. No one should be left like that." For a few moments, they stayed silent. The wind rose slightly, scattering thin waves of sand across the ground. Thomas scanned the horizon again. He did not like the stillness. "We cannot stay here," he said finally. "Can you walk?" Mara moved her legs slowly. Pain rippled through her muscles, but she could stand if she leaned on something. "I can try." Thomas offered his arm, and she held on. Together, they moved toward the rover. Finn ran ahead, climbing inside and clearing a space on the seat. When they reached the vehicle, Thomas helped Mara up and settled her in the back seat. The rover's inside was simple but clean, built for long travel. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and a screen on the dashboard showed maps and readings. As the engine started again, Mara leaned back, her body still weak but her mind racing. She had never been inside such a machine. Her people lived in stone houses and simple camps. They had no vehicles like this, no technology that could cross the desert so easily. Finn turned in his seat and smiled at her. "You will be safe. Father knows the desert." Mara looked at the boy and nodded slightly. There was something warm in his words. Safe. She had not felt that in a long time. The rover moved quickly, gliding over the sand. The hum of the engine was steady, a sound that somehow calmed her. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, but only for a moment. She did not want to forget where she was. Thomas kept his eyes on the horizon. He knew this was not the end of the matter. The desert was wide, but news traveled. If her people saw his tracks, they might follow. Taking someone from a sentence they had given could mean trouble. Still, he did not regret his choice. When they were several kilometers away, he slowed the rover and stopped behind a tall ridge. The suns were sinking lower, casting long shadows. Thomas turned to Mara. "Tell me your name," he said. "Mara," she replied softly. "I am Thomas," he said, then gestured to his son. "This is Finn." Mara's gaze moved to the boy again. "Your son?" "Yes," Thomas said simply. "And you do not fear helping me? My people will see this as wrong." Thomas's expression was steady. Right and wrong are not the same on every world. But leaving someone to die because of something they cannot change, that is not right anywhere. Mara lowered her eyes. The words struck her like a gentle weight. She had been left because she was seen as useless, but this stranger, this human, saw something else. Thomas started the rover again. "We will go to my home. There, you can rest. After that, we will decide what to do." The engine hummed louder as the vehicle moved forward once more, cutting across the open land. The sky above them shifted into colors of orange and red. The day was ending, but for Mara, something new had begun. The rover hummed across the desert, leaving a long trail in the sand behind it. The suns were sinking now, but the heat still hung in the air. Mara sat in the back seat, her body weak but her mind alert. Every sound of the engine, every bump in the sand, reminded her she was still alive. She kept glancing out the window, expecting to see movement on the horizon. Thomas kept both hands on the controls, calm but focused. He had traveled this desert many times. He knew its quiet could turn dangerous without warning. Finn sat beside him, his small feet swinging as he looked out at the endless dunes. Every so often, he turned to check on Mara, his young face full of curiosity but no fear. Mara's thoughts would not stop racing. She had been left to die by her own people, buried as if she were nothing. Now a stranger, not even of her kind, had risked himself to save her. She studied Thomas when she could. His face was lined with sun and work, but there was strength in the way he moved, in the way he made decisions without hesitation. She whispered, "Why did you help me?" Thomas did not look away from the desert. "Because you needed help. That is enough reason." "Even if it brings trouble?" she asked. "Some things are worth trouble," Thomas said simply. His words stayed with her. She turned her eyes back to the dunes, but the weight on her heart was lighter. The rover climbed a small ridge, and Thomas slowed the engine. From the top, they could see far across the sands. Behind them, the tracks they had made stretched like lines drawn across the land. Thomas scanned the view carefully. "No movement yet," he said to himself. "Good." But Mara knew it would not stay that way. Her people would come. They did not like shame, and for them, losing a condemned woman was shame. She tightened her hands on her knees. "They will follow. They will want me back." Thomas gave a short nod. "Then we will be ready." The words were steady, but Mara saw his jaw tighten. He was not careless. He understood danger. As the rover moved on, the air grew cooler. Shadows stretched across the sand. Finally, a darker shape appeared on the horizon. It was low and flat, but as they drew closer, Mara saw it was a structure. It was not a house like she knew, made of stone and clay. This was metal and glass, with panels that caught the fading sunlight. Thomas slowed the rover and stopped near the building. It was his home, set against a small ridge to shield it from the wind. There were tools lined neatly near the wall, and a small antenna rose into the air. Finn jumped out first, his boots kicking up dust. "We are home," he said with a grin. Thomas got out and came around to Mara's side. "Can you stand?" Mara hesitated. Her legs still felt weak, but she nodded. Thomas offered his arm, and she took it. The ground was solid but strange after being trapped so long. Step by step, she followed him inside. The inside of the home surprised her. It was simple but ordered. A large table stood near the center. Shelves held tools, parts, and small screens. A soft light came from panels above. There was even a corner with bright colors and toys where Finn kept his things. Thomas guided Mara to a chair and brought water and a small pack of food. "Eat slowly," he said. She nodded and tasted the food. It was simple but filling, and her body welcomed it. Finn sat across from her, his elbows on the table, watching her with open curiosity. "Where are you from?" the boy asked. "A village, far east of here," Mara said quietly. "We live by the cliffs." "Why did they leave you?" Finn asked. Mara lowered her eyes. The question hurt, but she answered. "Because I cannot give children. They believe it makes me useless." Finn frowned, confused. "But you are alive. You can work, speak, think. That is not useless." Mara's throat tightened at his words. She looked at Thomas. He said nothing but met her gaze with steady calm. The moment was broken by a sound. A sharp beep came from one of the screens on the wall. Thomas stood quickly and crossed to it. The screen showed a small map with a blinking light. "What is it?" Mara asked. "Movement," Thomas said. His voice was calm, but his shoulders were tense. "Far off, but coming this way. Could be animals, could be machines. Or could be your people." Mara's heart sank. "They will not stop." Thomas looked at her. "Then we will not make it easy for them." He moved quickly, checking equipment and activating small drones that hovered near the ceiling. He opened a panel on the wall and pulled out a long case. Inside were tools that looked sturdy and strong. Finn stayed close but quiet. He had seen his father prepare before. When Thomas moved like this, it meant danger was near. Mara watched him, unsure if she should feel fear or relief. This was not her world, not her way, but the human moved with quiet certainty, as if he had planned for this moment long before it came. Thomas turned back to her. You are safe here for now. Rest. They will not reach us tonight. Tomorrow, we will decide the next step. Mara wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust this man who had given her back her life. And when she saw the small smile Finn gave her, as if to say everything would be fine, she felt something she had not felt in many seasons. Night came slowly over the desert. The heat faded, and a cool wind moved across the sand, whispering around the small home. The suns dropped below the horizon, and stars filled the wide sky. Mara had never seen so many. Her village had nights, but they were spent near fires, close to walls and stone. Here the sky seemed endless. Inside the house, the lights were soft and warm. Thomas moved around with quiet purpose. He checked the door locks, powered up a small shield system that covered the outer walls, and placed a drone on standby outside. Finn followed him, carrying small items when asked. It was clear the boy knew this routine. Mara sat at the table, her hands folded. Her body was still sore, but the food and water had given her strength. She watched father and son move with an ease that came from practice. This was a place of work and care, but it was also a place ready for trouble. Thomas noticed her watching. You will be safe here tonight, he said. The shield can stop most things. And I doubt they will move fast in the dark. They will come, Mara said softly. They will not forgive this. Thomas looked at her and nodded. I believe you. That is why we are ready. He sat across from her and spoke calmly. Tell me about your people. How do they move? Do they travel with machines? Are they armed? Mara hesitated. Sharing such things felt like betrayal, but this man had saved her life. They travel mostly on foot. They use small ground beasts to carry loads, but some have old machines. They are proud, and they do not fear the desert. They will come in groups. They will bring spears and short blades. Sometimes they carry small shock rods, but they have little more. Thomas listened closely, nodding at each detail. How many would come for you? Maybe 6, maybe 10. Enough to make a point. They do not need to kill you to punish you. They would take me back and leave you as warning. Thomas leaned back slightly, his face calm but thoughtful. Then we will make sure that does not happen. Finn climbed into a chair beside Mara. Father knows how to stop trouble, he said with quiet pride. He fixed the water pipe when it broke in the storm. He made the drones fly again. He always finds a way. Mara smiled faintly. The boy's faith was bright and unshaken. You are lucky to have him, she said. Thomas rose and walked to a cabinet. From it, he pulled a light blanket and handed it to Mara. Rest, he said. There is a small room down the hall. You will be more comfortable there. Mara stood slowly, the blanket in her arms. The gesture touched her more than she expected. In her own home, kindness had limits. Here, even as danger approached, a stranger offered her comfort. The small room was simple but clean. A narrow bed, a small shelf, and a soft light on the wall. Mara lay down and closed her eyes, but sleep did not come quickly. She thought of the morning when she had been buried, when her own family turned away. She thought of this man and his child, who gave without asking for return. In the main room, Thomas stayed awake. He checked the screens often, watching for movement. The small map showed nothing yet, but he did not trust quiet nights. He ran a hand through his short hair and let out a slow breath. It was not the first time he had gone against a local custom. On worlds like this, there were many small societies, each with strict rules. He had seen unfair laws before, but this was different. To leave a living being buried because of something beyond control that had stirred something deep in him. Finn yawned and rubbed his eyes. Are they coming tonight? Maybe not, Thomas said. But we will be ready if they do. Can I stay here? The boy asked. Only for a little while, Thomas said gently. Then you sleep. I need you rested if we need to move tomorrow. Finn nodded and leaned against the chair, his small head heavy with sleep. The hours passed. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying small grains of sand against the walls. The sound was soft, almost like rain. Then, close to midnight, the screen beeped. A faint light appeared on the edge of the map. Thomas stood at once. The movement was slow but steady, coming from the east. He tapped the screen, zooming in. At least 3 shapes. Maybe more behind. Mara's door opened slightly. She stepped into the main room, her face calm but pale. They are coming, are they not? Yes, Thomas said. But still far. They are moving slow, maybe waiting for morning. They know the desert, Mara said. They will wait for light to fight. Thomas nodded. Then we have the night to prepare. He turned to his son, lifting him gently from the chair. Finn stirred but did not wake fully. Thomas carried him to his bed and covered him. Then he came back to the table where Mara waited. We may need to leave, Thomas said. If they come in numbers, this place could be trapped. Leave? Mara asked. I have a second rover. Smaller but faster. If needed, we can move before sunrise. Mara looked at him, surprised. You risk much for me. Why? Thomas met her gaze. Because someone has to. If no one stands against something wrong, it will never change. Mara lowered her eyes. His words were simple, but they struck deep. Thomas walked to the door and stepped outside for a moment. The night air was cold, and the stars seemed endless. Far on the horizon, a faint light flickered, too low to be a star. Morning came slowly over the desert. The first light touched the dunes, turning them orange and gold. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of dry earth. Inside the small home, Thomas was already awake. He had not slept much. His eyes were on the screen that showed the map, and the blinking marks were closer than they had been in the night. Mara stood behind him, silent. She had woken early as well, the sound of the wind against the metal walls keeping her alert. Her hands were folded in front of her, but her heart was racing. She knew her people. They would not stop. They are closer, she said quietly. Yes, Thomas replied. His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight. At least 6. Maybe more. They will come ready to fight, Mara warned. Thomas turned his head slightly to look at her. Then we will not make it easy for them. We will not fight unless we must, but we will be ready. He stood and moved to the shelves, taking down small cases. Inside were tools, metal rods, small devices that looked like silver discs, and 2 hovering drones. He set them on the table and began checking each one. Finn entered the room, rubbing his eyes. His hair was messy from sleep, but his steps were quick. Are they coming? He asked. Yes, Thomas said. But you do not need to worry. You will stay safe. Finn frowned. I can help. Thomas smiled faintly. You help by listening. Do what I say and stay close to the safe room if I tell you. That is enough. The boy nodded, though his face was serious. Thomas handed one of the drones to Mara. This is simple, he said. It watches and sends a signal if something moves. Can you place it outside on the ridge? Mara looked at the small machine. It hummed lightly in her hand. I can do that. Good, Thomas said. Stay low when you go. They moved together. Thomas stepped outside first, the cool morning air sharp on his face. The land stretched wide, the dunes rising like waves frozen in place. Nothing moved yet, but the air felt different, as if holding its breath. Mara walked to the ridge and placed the drone where Thomas showed her. The small device rose silently, its tiny lights blinking as it hovered. Another drone followed, circling the house. Back inside, Thomas checked the map again. The drone sent clear images to the screen. Dust trails were faint on the horizon. Shapes moved within them. The trackers were still far, but they were steady. They are not rushing, Mara said. They think they have time. Then we will use that time, Thomas replied. He opened another case and brought out a small set of shields. They were thin plates of metal with glowing edges. He placed them around the door and windows, fixing them into place. The house was not a fortress, but it was stronger than most. Will this stop them? Mara asked. It will slow them, Thomas said. And sometimes slowing is enough. The hours passed. The sun rose higher, the air warming quickly. Finn helped by carrying water and small tools. Mara watched the screens and learned quickly how to read them. Thomas worked without rushing, every move planned. By midday, the shapes were clearer. 8 figures moved across the sand. Some were on foot, others on small machines that rattled over the ground. Dust rose behind them. Mara felt her chest tighten. That is them, she said. They have come for me. Thomas looked at her. They will see I am not like them. They may not care, Mara said. They believe their law is stronger than any kindness. Thomas nodded slowly. Then we will show them another kind of strength. He walked to the safe room. It was a small chamber in the back of the house with thick walls. Inside were water, food packs, and air filters. He knelt down and looked at Finn. If anything happens, you come here, he said. You lock the door and stay quiet. Do not open it until I say. Finn's face was serious, but he nodded. Yes, father. Thomas placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I promise I will come back. But I need to know you are safe. Mara watched them and felt a strange ache in her chest. She had never seen such care. It was simple, quiet, but strong. The beeping of the screen broke the moment. The trackers were closer now, their outlines clear on the feed. Long cloaks, bright markings on their arms, and weapons in their hands. They moved with purpose, their faces hard. They are almost here, Mara said. Thomas stood and checked the door. Good. Let them come close. We will speak first. Fighting is the last choice. He stepped outside, the bright light of the sun striking his face. The wind carried sand around his boots. He stood tall, calm, his hands empty but ready. The figures appeared on the horizon, small at first, then larger as they came closer. They moved in a line, their steps sure. The machines growled on the sand, carrying supplies and weapons. Thomas did not move. He let them see him, a single man standing at the edge of his home. Inside, Mara watched from the window, her hands gripping the frame. She felt fear, but she also felt something else, a strange trust. The trackers stopped some distance away. One of them raised a hand. The group spread slightly, a show of strength. The leader stepped forward, a tall figure with a dark cloak. The desert stretched wide and silent, the heat shimmering in the distance. Thomas stood outside his home, the light from the twin suns shining on his face. The trackers were closing in, their long cloaks moving with the wind. They stopped just far enough to keep a safe distance but close enough for voices to carry. Mara watched from the window, her heart racing. Finn sat in the safe room, quiet but alert, just as his father had asked. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was tall and broad, his cloak marked with red and gold. His face was hidden under a hood, but his voice was clear. "Human," he called. "You have taken what is ours. You will return her to us now." Thomas's stance was calm, his hands loose at his sides. "She is not a thing to be owned. She is a person. She is alive. And she asked for help." The leader's voice hardened. "She is marked. She is unfit. Our laws are clear. You have no right to interfere." "I do not follow your laws," Thomas said. "I follow what is right. Leaving someone buried to die because they cannot do something beyond their control is not right." Mara pressed her hand to the wall. Hearing those words stirred something deep inside her. The trackers shifted, their weapons glinting in the light. Some carried short spears, others had shock rods that hummed softly. Their faces were stern, unbending. "She belongs to us," the leader said again. "You risk your life for nothing. Give her back and leave." Thomas stepped forward just slightly, his voice steady. "I will not give her to death. If you want to harm me, you can try, but you will not take her." The words carried weight. The wind seemed to pause. The trackers looked at each other, unsure. Few had heard anyone speak to them like this. Inside, Mara whispered to herself, "Why does he do this for me?" The leader took another step. "You are only one man." Thomas gave a small nod. "Yes. But one man can still stand." With a motion of his hand, 2 drones rose from behind the ridge. They hovered silently, their small lights glowing blue. A third moved into view from the side, circling the trackers slowly. The leader hesitated, his eyes on the machines. "You think these toys will save you?" "They will warn me," Thomas said calmly. "And they will defend if you strike first." "I do not want to fight. But I will not stand aside." For a long moment, no one moved. The trackers shifted, unsettled by the calm voice of a man who did not show fear. Finally, the leader laughed, but it was short and sharp. "You are foolish. She cannot give life. She has no value. Why waste your strength?" Thomas's face tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Value is not measured by what someone can give you. Value is in who they are. She healed your people, did she not? She worked, she cared, and yet you buried her. That is weakness, not strength." The words struck. Some of the trackers lowered their eyes. Mara felt tears sting her own. The leader's voice grew harsh. "You speak as if you know us." "I know cruelty when I see it," Thomas said. "I will not return her. She is under my care now. Go back to your village. Do not force this." The wind rose, carrying sand across the ground. The trackers stood still, the tension sharp. Then, far in the distance, the sky darkened slightly. A low rumble came from the west. Thomas glanced up. A storm was forming, the kind that swept the desert without mercy. The leader noticed too. His voice carried a warning. "A storm comes. You cannot protect her when the sands rise." Thomas's eyes stayed on the horizon. "I can protect more than you think. And if you want to survive that storm, you may need my shelter as well." The leader's hands tightened at his sides. He was proud, but storms were dangerous. The desert did not forgive pride. "Why offer us safety?" he asked sharply. "We came to take from you." Thomas's voice was calm. "Because right and wrong do not change with the wind. You want to harm someone. I want to protect. But if the storm comes, we are all just people under the same sky." The trackers were silent. Even Mara held her breath. The first strong gust hit, throwing sand into the air. It stung the skin and blurred the horizon. Thomas stepped back toward the house but did not close the door. You can stay until the storm passes, he said, his voice loud enough to carry. But the woman stays here. She is free now. The leader looked at his group. Some shifted uneasily. The sand rose higher, the sound of the storm growing louder. The desert was about to swallow everything in its path. Finally, the leader raised his hand. We will wait. But this is not over. Maybe it is just beginning, Thomas said quietly. They moved closer, some covering their faces against the rising wind. Thomas guided them inside, keeping a careful eye on every motion. Mara stepped back as they entered, unsure but amazed. They had come to take her, but now they were in the same shelter, forced to wait out nature's anger together. The walls shook as the first wave of the storm hit. Outside, the desert vanished under a sea of moving sand. Inside, Thomas stood straight, his face calm. He had saved a woman from the ground, faced a group that wanted her dead, and now gave even his enemies a roof over their heads. The storm raged for hours. The sound of the sand hitting the metal walls was like endless rain, but heavier. The house shook at times, and dust slipped in through the smallest cracks. Inside, the air was tense. The trackers sat along the far wall, their cloaks dusty and their faces tight. Mara stayed close to Finn, who sat quietly but alert. Thomas moved through the room with calm steps, checking the drones and making sure the power stayed steady. No one spoke for a long time. The storm outside was too loud, and the weight of their meeting still hung heavy. When the wind finally began to soften, the silence inside grew heavier. Mara finally stood. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "Why do you hate me?" she asked. Every head turned to her. The leader of the trackers, the tall man with the red and gold cloak, looked at her with hard eyes. "You are not hated. You are judged. Our laws are clear. Those who cannot give life are a burden to the tribe. We survive because we do not carry the weak." Mara's chin lifted. "But I worked. I healed your people. I helped raise your young. I taught the little ones to read your sky maps. Was that weakness?" The leader said nothing. His jaw tightened. Thomas stepped closer to her side, his voice calm but strong. "She speaks truth. You call it law, but law without heart becomes cruelty. She was never weak. She is alive, and that is worth more than your rules." One of the younger trackers shifted, his eyes uneasy. "She saved my sister once," he said quietly. "When the fever came. I remember." The leader shot him a sharp glance, but the young man did not look away. Thomas caught this small crack and pressed further. "You see? Her life has value. You came here to take her because your law said so, but your own people know her worth. Why punish someone for something beyond their control?" The storm outside faded to a distant hum. The desert was still dangerous, but now it was quiet enough for words to matter. Mara spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "I did not ask to be born like this. But I can still give. I can still help. I can still be something good. Is that not enough?" The leader lowered his eyes. His pride was strong, but even he could feel the weight of her words. Finally, he said, "It is not about hate. It is about survival. When food is scarce, when our numbers must grow, we cannot spare those who cannot carry the tribe forward." Thomas took a step closer. "Then you should learn. Growth is not only in numbers. It is in strength of spirit, in skill, in care. A tribe that throws away its own will one day be alone." The room was still. Even Finn was watching now, his young face serious. The leader's voice dropped. "You speak like you know more than us." "I speak because I have seen more," Thomas said. "I have buried my own. I have raised a child alone. I have known loss. And I know that if someone had buried me because I could not give what they wanted, my son would have no father. Would that have been right?" The leader looked at Finn. The boy met his gaze without fear. Something shifted in the man's face, a flicker of thought, a hesitation. When the storm ended fully, the desert outside was changed. The sand had moved, covering old paths, creating new ones. The world was not the same as before. The trackers stood, brushing the dust from their cloaks. The leader turned to Thomas and Mara. "The law does not change easily," he said. "But I will not take her today. You have claimed her life as your care. For now, we will leave." Mara's breath caught. She could hardly believe the words. "You mean I am free?" The leader's voice was careful. "You are safe here. But do not return to the tribe. They are not ready to see as you do." Thomas nodded once. "That is enough. Go in peace." The trackers filed out into the pale light. The leader paused at the door. "You are a strange man, human. You defend with words when others would fight. Perhaps that is strength too." Then they were gone, their shapes fading into the shifting sands. When the last of their shadows disappeared, Mara turned to Thomas. "You saved me twice. First from the ground, then from them." Thomas looked at her, his face calm but kind. "No one should be left behind. You have worth. I only showed them what was already true." Finn stepped forward, his voice quiet. "Does this mean she stays?" Thomas smiled slightly. "If she wants to." Mara's eyes filled with something she had not felt in years. "Hope." She nodded. "I want to. If you will have me." The sun broke through the last of the storm clouds, sending light across the desert. It touched the small home, the boy, the man, and the woman who had been left for dead but was alive again. The days that followed were not simple. The desert was still harsh, and work was still hard. But something had changed. Mara found her hands busy again, helping Thomas with the machines, teaching Finn things she knew, and laughing at his small jokes. And at night, when the desert cooled and the stars filled the sky, they sat together outside, looking at the endless horizon. Mara often thought of the moment she was buried, the fear and the darkness. But now she thought of it differently. It was not an ending. It was the place she had waited until someone saw her worth. The world might not have changed its laws, but here, in this small home, one man and his child had chosen something better.